As we've been reporting, Sean Diddy Combs has managed to avoid the biggest charges in his trial. He was, however, found guilty for 2 counts of prostitution-related crimes, each one carrying a maximum of 10 years behind bars. We are joined now by Jeremy Saland with more analysis on all of this. Before we get to the RICO charge, what everybody is talking about, I just want to say what we were just talking about before we came on the air here. Those 10 years you seem to think is very unlikely on each count.
Absolutely. Theoretically, he can get consecutive on 10 years on each of the 2, Jane and Cassie. Practically speaking, now all you have is just these charges, while in that sentencing request, the prosecution can reference things that he was acquitted of, meaning Sean Combs, but he's a first-time offender. If Sean Combs gets 2 or 3 years, that would be probably a lot. Certainly I can't read the mind of the judge, but that would be reasonable and something you might expect for someone who was solely charged and convicted of this crime.
Let's go back to what I referenced off the top. That is the racketeering conspiracy. That seemed to be what the jury was struggling with yesterday when they came back to the judge sending that note. Was this a mistake for the prosecution to go for this to begin with?
I think the Southern District has sort of a misguided problem. I don't think they should be sort of wandering into or wading into Mangione. That's a state case. And this case sort of reminded me a little bit of the Weinstein case, meaning very different allegations, but Harvey Weinstein was prosecuted in New York. He was prosecuted in California on state charges. This is more akin to state charges. A domestic abuser, if true, yes. Someone who beat up a woman, if true, yes. But that RICO was an absolute overcharge, and the power of the Southern District to do that should not be lost on anyone. And this should be a message that merely because you can doesn't mean you should, nor does it mean you'll prove that case beyond a reasonable doubt.
Do you think that is a general overreach that we have been watching over the last several years? Because it does feel like we are hearing more about RICO being used more broadly than it ever was before.
You know, it can be used broadly, and you can do it on the state level too, and that's all right. But when you're trying a person for this conspiracy, not even with an empty chair next to him about someone in the wind, there was no co-defendant. There was no co-conspirator you heard from. There was a woman, KK, who was chief of staff. You heard from her through text messages and things like that. There was so much lacking. And you know, if the prosecution is saying that all you need to do is find one act of fraud, force, or coercion for trespass, sex trafficking, pardon me, that tells me that, oh my gosh, maybe I don't have it. Jury, just all you need is one. All you need is one. It should have been overwhelming, and it was lacking.
Is that why the defense was confident enough to not, put anyone on the stand, to only do cross-examination?
Well, I think they had to work with what they had. In terms of confidence, I don't know if that's the right answer. They only had what they had. They did not necessarily have the exculpatory evidence in terms of witnesses to cross-examine, and not having Sean Combs testify was then the right move, and in retrospect was certainly the right move. Absolutely.
What does this mean more broadly about cases like this? Regardless of the outcome in this verdict, Cassie Ventura spoke about harrowing experience that she had with Diddy. Everyone has seen the video. What does this mean for the larger Me Too movement, do you think, within the court system?
Well, let's differentiate between innocent and not guilty. And the law is the law. But even by the own admission of the defense, Sean Combs did some bad things and did some ugly things. And to my point that I started off with, maybe this case should have been prosecuted as a state case for those acts of domestic violence at the time, or the arson as alleged involving Kid Cudi at the time or shortly thereafter if the evidence was there. Not because you can't do it elsewhere, throw it into some RICO charge. I hope it doesn't deter women or men, anyone for that matter, to come forward if they're a victim of a crime, but it's incumbent upon law enforcement to look at the 4 corners of what they have and proceed accordingly and not make it something it is not, because that is a grave injustice in the criminal justice system, to a complainant victim, and to the accused.
What kind of appeal are you expecting from the defense? Are we going to hear about the juror or, the problems that they had with the jury, saying that someone could not cooperate? Or do you expect any sort of interference from the presidential administration? What do you expect to see?
Yeah, I think some of the notes that we heard from it and the removal of a juror and about not being able to come to follow the judge's instructions, cannot, I believe was a terminology. These are things that will be brought up on appeal, but I will tell you that it is a burden off the shoulders of Sean Combs that he's fighting that, and hopefully for him from the outside. And I will say a little glibly, I mean, there's, you have Aaron Judge hitting home runs in New York. Mark Agnifilo hit a grand slam for Sean Combs in the context of that courtroom and what he was facing. Even if Sean Combs spends a day in jail beyond tonight, he's done a terrific job.
Jeremy, thank you.